Good morning. Welcome to Garden Grounds. We will get started in about 3 minutes. I'm just going to finish setting up. Going to wait till like a minute after 11. Just let people find the public live. Today we're going to, public live. This is a Q&A. I do every second Thursday and fourth Thursday of the month at 11 a.m. It's public. Anybody can join. I'll take any question that you have about vegetable gardening. Sometimes I throw in a theme. Today's theme is extending the fall harvest. I'll talk a little bit about that, but it's really about 45 minutes, 60 minutes for you to throw out whatever questions you have about gardening, and I will answer them the best way that I can. So usually I get on a couple minutes early, make sure everything is working, give people time to join. So we'll get started in about 2 minutes. If you have a question, a lot of people watch this, so it's really important that you put question in front of your question. So when I'm looking at the chat and things are going through, I can pick out your question and hopefully answer it. So again, we'll get started in about 2 minutes. I'm just going to set up the chat and check out a couple of things here. All right, looks like things are set up on this end. I do like to always ask, can you guys hear me? Because I do have a tendency to mess up the mic every once in a while. So go ahead and throw out your questions. I will kind of put the theme out, which is extending the fall garden shortly, but I want to wait for more people to join. All right, I think we'll get started. So people are going to be joining on. I'm going to repeat myself a little bit, but it's really important for these public lives that I do every second Thursday and every fourth Thursday at 11 a.m. I'm in Maryland, Eastern time, is make sure you put question in front of your question, or I'm not going to be able to see it. It's the fall, so to speak, with respect to temperatures. So I want to talk a little bit about extending the fall season. It's a little bit hard to do that sometimes live because I'm describing things that are probably best shown as, videos or pictures or something like that. But I think what's most important is here in Maryland, over the last 7 to 10 days, the nights have been getting into the 50s. That's been cooling the root temperature, the soil temperature, of my warm crops, so tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, squash, zucchini. As the temperatures drop, roots get cooler and these plants stop producing. It's kind of like when I look out my window, I have a maple tree. It's starting to turn orange and red. That's when I know that it's getting too cool. So no matter what I do to try and really extend the season for the warm crops, again, tomatoes, peppers, etc., I'm not going to be able to do a whole lot. The root systems are cooling down, the air temperature is cooling down, and it's usually 50-degree nights that really marks the end of your warm season crop. So when we talk about extending the fall season, we're talking about cool weather crops that can take a frost, that like the cold soil, and how can you get them in Maryland from like late November, maybe into January, get them through that really hard freezing period where the ground freezes. Your cool crops do fine with frosts at night, warm temperatures during the day, and they thaw and they do their thing. So we'll be talking about how can you keep those leafy greens going, radishes, turnips, kales, those kind of crops. So let's start with questions. This is what, the Garden Grounds is all about. Besides fencing, what other methods are there to keep deer out of a garden? I'm limited on fencing I can use. I tried fishing line, works 50%, lost all my okra, corn, and pepper. So there isn't a lot. In my opinion, deer repellents and sprays, they don't work. They get used to those smells. They come to the garden. So fence is important. I have a garden where I have not fishing line because that can break, but I have just black kind of polycord in 3 levels on T-post. You can't visually really see that when you're out in your yard. I have bells, like the little jingle bells that you put on, an elf hat or something like that. That does keep them away. The smaller deer sometimes can crawl under there, but it's like the fishing line you're talking about, except it's probably more like 80% effective. Nowadays, you can also get electric fencing, which sounds terrible, but it's not as bad as you think. It's a thin wire. It's hard to see. It's solar powered. It can be put on a timer so that maybe it's off during the day so that, if kids or people touch it, it's okay. They won't get shocked. And then it comes on at night. But the electric fencing is less expensive nowadays, solar powered, and that can make a difference. But aside from that, you really do need a fence. And just FYI, my fence is 4 feet tall. I have posts that I could raise it to 6 feet by putting, rope or something along there. The whole key to fencing is on the outside, have a garden bed. Maybe you're growing onions or garlic, things the deer won't eat. They don't like to try and jump over something on the ground and over the fence. And then on the inside of your garden, if you have raised beds too, they do see that it's a long distance to jump. So they're not going to really jump over a fence where they don't see a clear place to land. And that does really keep them out of the garden because deer can easily jump 6 feet. So just something to keep in mind. I'm using a 4-foot fence and it does manage them. And all along the inside, I have garden beds, and it's just not a great place for a deer to jump. I mean, they're afraid to break their legs. Like if we were to jump over something and land into something, we don't want that. We want flat ground. Any other questions? Shirley, if one bed is full and another bed isn't, can I take some soil out of one bed, put it into the other? Will it upset the soil microbes? Soil microbes have been around for 1 billion years. You can dig your garden, you can turn your garden, flip it over, add amendments, flip it over. That's just simple turning. Microbes have been doing this long before us. They will figure it out. They will go back in place. You're not wrecking your garden. When we talk about like no dig gardens or don't turn your garden, you're going to wreck the soil life. It's true and it's not true. If you get a tiller that tills down 10, 12 inches and pulverizes and grinds up everything, kills the worms, pulverizes all the layers, you're doing disjustice to your garden soil and you're causing harm. It will correct itself eventually, but you don't need to do that. Simply putting in a shovel, flipping over your soil to 10 inches deep, breaking up chunks of clay, the microbes are going to reestablish. So you can certainly do that and you don't have to worry about wrecking anything. If you don't have to turn your soil, like no dig is great. If you've got great soil to start with, a gazillion pounds of compost, you throw down 6 inches of compost, that's basically your garden soil. So it's already loose, it's already fluffy. The reason you're not digging is because you don't have to. You're basically bringing in new soil just about every time. But it really works, and I have a no-dig garden. My garden is typically a lot of clay. So the first 2 years or 3 years, I turned it more. Now that it's established where I grow transplants, I don't turn that soil anymore. I don't even pull roots out. I just cut stuff to the ground. I just did a video on that if you want to check out my YouTube channel. Most recent video, you'll see that I just cut tomatoes off at the roots, ground level, throw on some amendments, let it sit over the winter. Come spring, I plant into it. It works because my beds are set up. You don't have to go right from nothing to a no-dig style. You can build up your ground, and then eventually you kind of ease up and you go to no-dig. Let's see. Christina, I planted a variety of broccoli in the spring. They have not produced a head. I have 4 weeks until frost. What causes them not to produce? The plant looks good and are about 5 feet tall. So if you planted broccoli in the spring and you didn't accidentally mean late summer, I don't know what you're growing. 5 feet tall broccoli probably is a kale, I think. Broccoli only gets maybe 2 or 3 feet tall. It should form a head in the spring. When it gets warm, it flowers. So you should have had something. So I'm not sure what you have, to be honest with you. I don't think it's going to produce. I would probably guess that it is some sort of kale. That's new to me, so I'm not sure. Do you still recommend putting down alfalfa pellets in the fall beds? I do. I don't have to do that as much now because I have a lot of compost. So a couple of things. This is the public live. I do this every second Thursday of the month, fourth Thursday of the month at 11 a.m. So anybody can join. I also have perk memberships that if you go to my YouTube channel, you have to find the join button, hit join, and you can select what tier you want. In that, I do, on the first tier, first level, 4 of these mentoring Q&As per month. They last for about an hour. The groups are much smaller. They're like 20 to 35 people. I stay on, answer everybody's questions, and it's a really tight group. Gardening Dogs is a member of the perk membership. I'm going to answer that question in a second. It's just a great way if you want help being able to access not only me, but all the group members and have questions. And, you know, at least once a month, at least once a week, we're doing a Q&A. I also do other things, a Grow as We Grow series, a classroom series. You can find all that out. So alfalfa pellets come in 40-pound bags. They're about $25. They have N, P, and K in there. They are a great organic fertilizer, extremely cheap. When you think $20, $25, they used to even be cheaper. For 40 pounds or 50 pounds, depending on what you're buying. It's really inexpensive. And I would just scatter alfalfa all over my beds, water it in. They break up. They're, fine particles. Animals do not come and eat them. Alfalfa has a natural growth hormone. It's just a great way to add NP and K to your ground and some organic matter. So I do recommend it. People worry that it might have some sort of chemical in there. I've not had any trouble with it. You can always buy organic alfalfa. What I recommend anytime you buy bagged products, call the company, research, ask them, try and learn what you're buying. That's the best way to do it. But alfalfa is a great alternative to buying 5-pound bags of fertilizer that can cost you like $2 or $3 a pound. Shirley, if we answered that one. Harmony. Hi, Gary. This spring I planted zinnias and cosmos flowers in my raised beds. I've cleaned out the beds for the fall, and I'm still getting loads of sprouts of these flowers popping up. They are crazy cedars. The cold will kill them off. So you can leave them there, and they'll just become organic matter. But as soon as a frost comes in, they're going to die off. The annual seeds, they should probably sprout anyway, especially if you planted them in spring. All the seeds have fallen. So I think that you'll be fine. Bikuma, Charles, Dowding is great. And no dig is wonderful. You just have to get your land to a place that you can do that. And that includes having really lots of compost. Compost is king or queen. It's the best stuff ever. If you use compost, you don't have to spend money on organic granular fertilizer. You save so much money. But I know that everybody watching doesn't necessarily have the space or the materials to make tons of compost. So I like to talk about all kinds of different options for people. But no dig is wonderful when you've got tons of compost. Urban Chicken Mama. She's also a perk member. How long does a bed need to be unused if I just cut down the plant and leave the roots? I'm thinking it wouldn't work if I'm planting onions or garlic. Thanks. So some of the things, so like my tomato beds, I have a set against a fence. I put 3 plants in. Those beds are pretty well established. Cut off the roots, or cut off the stems, ground level, throw in my amendments. The roots and stuff in here aren't necessarily going to break up, but I use it primarily for transplants. So come spring, the stuff in the ground is still going to break up, but the new roots are just going to grow all around it. They're not going to care what's in there. That's why no dig works so well. We kind of over worry that the stuff down below has to be super loose for roots. Roots find their way through. They put in airspace and all that kind of stuff. So that works. To answer your question, if you are putting in garlic, cloves, in November, it is important to loosen where the clove is going to go. You could drop it in. That will be fine. If you're going to put in onion transplants that maybe are about this tall, they'll be fine too. Sometimes if you're doing seeds, when you don't kind of loosen up the soil, it's a little too compact and seeds don't germinate well. But I think that you would be okay. Worst case is I would leave the roots in the ground, loosen the top 2 inches, put in your onion sets, put in your garlic. Things will be perfectly fine. You don't have to wait for the roots down below to really break down. The thing with tomatoes and stuff is they just put out tons of surface roots. So the surface is going to be a little more dense, and you can break that up. It's kind of a hybrid. You're not turning it to 6, 8, 10 inches. You're just going to loosen that top 2 inches for your onions and for your garlic. If I do miss your question for some reason, you can throw it back out there. For those of you just joining, again, put question in front, or I'm going to miss your question. Linda, my vegetables started very slow and weak this past spring. I think that I over-fertilized granular and liquid were too much maybe. They caught up eventually. So I'm trying to put your question together. Usually too much liquid fertilizer means a lot of nitrogen. So the plants should not be slow and weak. They should be maybe possibly over bushy and green. I'm not sure what happened. I mean, if you want to make the question a little bit more specific, I can answer it better. You don't need to overdo the fertilizers. You just need NP and K represented. On the side note, compost is well below a 1-1-1 NP and K. It's not high levels, but when you're using compost, you just have a continuous supply. So maybe cut back on the fertilizer, but I don't necessarily think that was the reason. Jay, can you suggest an affordable source for heavy, thick rolls of agricultural fabric? Thanks. So I don't have a specific place, but greenhousemegastore.com is one of the biggest websites, and they tend to get things pretty cheaply. Sometimes you find stuff on sale. I would maybe look there, and again, it's greenhousemegastore.com. But I'm not totally familiar with everything they have, but I do know they have fabrics there. All right, so real quick, extending the fall season. So we're talking again about fall crops that can take a frost. Your tomatoes, peppers, all your warm crops. Now here in Maryland, as I was saying, that the nights are getting into the 50s. We had a 40-degree night last night. Once that happens, your warm crop roots get cool. They're really going to stop producing. My maple tree's turning red. The leaves are turning red. Watermelons will stop producing. Those leaves are going to kind of turn. It's just like what happens to trees when the warm weather or when the cool weather comes in. So you can't really extend the warm crops unless you put them into a heated greenhouse. You'll need heat at night. Having warm days or a greenhouse that gets up to 70 or 80, but at night temperatures still drop, warm crops aren't going to do really well. Your cool crops can go. So the best thing to really extend the season for cool crops is if you have a raised bed. I have videos on it. I just did one. You can check that out. But you get PVC pipe and you just do a half rainbow across it or a full rainbow across it, a half circle. And you can lay plastic painter's tarp or greenhouse plastic over there, secure it to the ground. That keeps in some of the heat at night. The cool crops love the cool temperature. You're just protecting them from heavy freezes. So just basically a very low tunnel really makes a difference. You could put fabric across it at night, take it off during the day. That helps keep some of the heat in. The whole goal with extending the season for your fall crops is preventing the ground from freezing. It's when the ground freezes and right where kind of the stem of the plant hits the roots, that freezes, prolonged freeze, it kills off the plants. So a low tunnel with some plastic over it works really well. Even your ag fabric frost protection across it works really well. Those things make a difference. Of course, you can get cold frames and you can grow in Maryland in cold frames really well into January. It really makes a difference. And the whole key is not protecting them from the cold. It's stopping the soil from freezing. All right, let's see if we have any other questions. Two gals, also a PERC member. I didn't get a chance to plant fall crops in time. I'm thinking of growing cool weather crops in a GreenStalk. That's a vertical tower, 5-6 levels, in the greenhouse over the winter. What do you think? I think that would work. So again, the greenhouse, and I think your greenhouse is unheated, so the nights are still going to get cold, but the vertical tower itself is going to hold some heat. And it's going to freeze much more slowly than if it was left outside in Vermont. So I think that you could grow leafy greens, you could grow radishes in there, you could really kind of extend the season that way. So because the greenhouse is going to heat up during the day, get above the outdoor temperatures, that heat's going to go into the vertical tower and it's going to keep it from freezing at night. So you kind of made a heat sink with the vertical tower. I think that would work. Tina, I planted hardneck garlic already and they're sprouting already. Did I plant too soon? No. So anytime you plant garlic, the key to plant garlic now is for the roots to establish, for it to get strong. It's always good to send up some greenery. I mean, maybe you planted a little bit too early, but to better answer your question, that's not going to stop the garlic from growing next year. So you might get a lot of green growth. You could clip it off. You could use it. It's going to taste like garlic, or just leave it there. It's going to get all beat up. It's going to look terrible. But come spring, you give it some water-soluble fertilizer, all this new green growth goes, and I think you'll be fine. Jamaica, I wish I could tell you there was a plant to ward off insect pests. There really isn't. Companion planting is great, but there's no magic bullet that you ward off pests. So, by putting in more flowers and more fragrant plants, you do decrease maybe the amount of pests that come to your garden, but you're not going to stop them. And if a pest comes in and wants to establish, it's going to establish. The best way to manage pests and diseases is really have a spraying routine that you stick with, unfortunately. I wish, like if there was this magic plant, and I know you're not saying where I need a magic plant, but for us gardeners, if there was this magic plant or magic way that worked amazingly, we would all know about it. We would all be doing it. So you get a lot of companion plants, stop pests from coming to your garden. It's somewhat true, but it's not going to stop them. It really comes down to how you spray and manage. But the more pollinator plants you put out, or more plants you put out that attract pollinators and beneficial insects, the more balanced ecosystem you have. So you do end up with less damage. What would I do if I have purple coneflower, coreopsis, I have, purple coneflower coreopsis I use a lot. I have holly seafoam, anything that's fragrant, marigolds, anything that's really going to attract insects works really well. Bone set is a perennial here in Maryland. It gets like 6 feet tall, massive white flowers. It attracts so many different kinds of wasps and bees and insects that it's great. You have to put that in a place outside your garden, but that's called bone set. All right, just checking for questions. So Harmony, my sweet potatoes are over 100 days, but they are still tiny. Should I add fertilizer? It's not going to make a difference at this point. I'm not sure what happened. I mean, sweet potatoes require lots of water, so that makes a difference. If you set up the soil pretty well and the green grew, I'm a little bit surprised that they're so tiny. However, adding stuff now, I mean, you can give them a water-soluble fertilizer that has phosphorus in it. I mean, there's a product called More Bloom that's a 0-10-10, but it's not going to make a significant change because your frost is rolling in soon. Now, it's quite possible if you keep them watered with or without fertilizer, they're going to, plump up a little bit. But they love the heat. So if your temperatures, even though the frost isn't until November and it's getting to be 50-degree nights and stuff, it does kind of slow down. Next year, I might add in more potassium and phosphorus into your soil, beef it up a little bit, but I'm not sure you did anything wrong. Sometimes the variety makes a difference too. Angela, growing indoors this winter, how to use compost indoors and avoid flies. So I would not bring anything from the outdoors inside, like you're already suggesting. Lots of eggs, flies, fungus gnats, and stuff like that. If you're growing inside, I recommend making your own starting mix, which is usually peat moss and vermiculite. Tons of videos on that. Use boiling water, hydrate it, kill off anything that's in there. You can make it or you can buy it. If you buy it, make sure you put in boiling water. Peat moss always has fungus gnat eggs. And then I would use a chemical type fertilizer, which is not going to harm you or your plants. The reason you use those indoors is because you don't have an ecosystem of microbes and life like you do outside. You just have sterile soil. So the NP and K and the human-made chemicals, processed chemicals, are safe. They're not fake. They're not artificial, all that. They're going to work really well. You could use, if you want, fish emulsion, which is organic, but it is going to smell in your house. You could use AgroThrive, which is organic, which is going to smell less in your house. But the bottom line is that you want to add water-soluble fertilizers, in my opinion, to a sterile mix, and that will make a difference. Worm castings can be added if they're if it's a quality brand. If they're sifted, aged worm castings, and it's just worm castings, you can add them in. There's usually nothing in that. If you're getting worm castings that are like a mix of worm compost and some castings, that can have eggs and stuff in there too, and they could hatch. So if you're bringing in if you're using any bag product, you want to kind of learn about it and see what happens. But that would be my recommendation. So some of the cool crops, ways to extend the fall season, of course, lettuces, spinach, kale, the leaves can freeze. Radishes do well. Turnips do well. Pak choi or bok choy loves the cold, does best in the cold. And I would set up, if you haven't done it, and you go to the store, you can get 8 to 10 foot pieces of 1/2-inch PVC pipe, and you can, rainbow over your beds. You can put in 18 inches pieces of rebar. You just want to bring the pipe to the rebar section of Home Depot and make sure the PVC slips over the rebar. You can hammer in the rebar wherever you want. You can put the PVC pipe over it. You have the ribs, like whale ribs, the half rainbow, and then cover it with plastic. When you do that, what I recommend is it's a low tunnel. So you're just trying to keep it 3 feet or lower. The lower it is to the ground, the better it traps in the heat, and then you can grow in there. And you can really drape plastic over it, weight it down with bricks, remove the bricks, lift up the plastic, and harvest and stuff. You don't have to build anything fancy with doors or anything like that. I do have videos on cold frames, how to build them. And a cold frame, again, is more of a box angled that you aim towards the southern sun, and you have plastic over it. And you lift up the lid, you can grow in there. That's a great way to grow too. For those, sometimes you need to grow lower plants that don't get too tall. Butter crunch lettuce, maybe romaine will fit in there, spinach, radishes, etc. All right, let's go back to the questions. Denicia, I have some black heirloom tomatoes that have taken a long time to ripen. I'm in the eastern zone. Do I keep them on a vine? So to ripen indoors, you just bring them in. Stick them on your windowsill. They will naturally ripen. There is truth that if you put them in a plastic or in a paper bag, close the bag, throw in a banana, sometimes they ripen faster, and it all has to do with the chemicals that the banana releases and stuff like that. But they will ripen just putting them on a windowsill. If you're in a place where you're getting the 50-degree nights now, your tomatoes are really going to stop producing, and the tomatoes aren't going to get any larger. So you could go ahead and pick them. You can leave them on the vine for a while, but when the temperatures start getting into the 40s, the 50s at night, the plant itself begins to die back, and it's more susceptible to diseases. Diseases take hold that normally wouldn't take hold when you have a healthy plant living in the warm soil, warm days. So the tomatoes themselves could get disease too the longer you leave them on. But with the tomato, you can always cut off anything that looks ugly and still eat it. Christina, do you know of a company to buy fruit trees like peaches and apples? I don't buy anything through the mail. I've tried that before, bare roots. But I actually go to Home Depot and Lowe's, and their fruit trees are anywhere from like $40 to $80, but they're like 3-year-old trees. My orchard of, I don't know, maybe a dozen trees now all came from those stores. I also went to Sun Nursery here in Maryland. They were more expensive, but they were a little bit better trees. Anyway, those trees work. You just have to get them in the ground soon. Fall is great because if you plant them, late spring when it's getting hot, trees only have this little root ball, so they often die. When you put them in the fall, the soil's moist, they go dormant, the roots do their thing, and then come spring, they're ready to take off and grow. But Home Depot and Lowe's, those trees are okay. Harmony, my sweet potato. Oh, we got that one. Growing indoors. Yeah, so I see that some of the questions I missed. So again, if I'm missing it, just throw them down at the end. It's 11:30. We'll go for another good 20 minutes. Garden dogs. My GreenStalk is outside and full of strawberry plants. I removed the dead leaves, added some fish emulsion. Should I leave them over the winter, or should I bring them in the garage? So I would leave them out. I'm in Maryland. The bigger freezes come in January, February. If you wanted to bring them in the garage, I would bring them in as late as you can. But I do leave mine out. So my GreenStalk towers, my strawberries stay out 24/7 here in Maryland, and they come back. Strawberries are really hardy. But you wouldn't have to bring them in now. I mean, they're still green. I mean, wait till the bigger freezes are coming in your area, and you could put them in for a month. And they'll be okay, and they'll give them a little bit of protection. All right. So again, for people coming on, this is Garden Grounds. I do this every second Thursday and fourth Thursday at 11 a.m. each month. It's a public live. I talk about a theme just a little bit, but it's really for answering all your garden questions. So you can throw anything out there. Please, if you have a question, just put question in the front. If you like this format and you want to join my perk memberships, you can find that on the YouTube channel. There's a join button. Sometimes it's hard to find on your phone. It's easier to find on a laptop or a desktop. And then I do this mentoring Q&A at least 4 times a month. I do 2 live classrooms. I do a series called Grow as We Grow, where people can send in video questions or video tours depending on what tier they've joined, and I put that video together. In fact, we'll be launching that video, I think the 9th Grow as We Grow video this Friday. Let me throw a couple links out. I have a seed and garden shop. You can find neem oil, peppermint oil, all kinds of different things there. Certainly lots of seeds. All right. Let me just pull the chat back. All right, just trying to find where I left off here. I'm going to go up a little bit further. Bear with me. All right, so I planted a bunch of lettuces or peas for my fall garden, but forgot to label them. Any tips to identify plants based on the seedlings? Well, I mean, peas, once the lettuce and peas come up, you're going to be able to know. You're not going to be able to tell the different varieties. If you did multiple pea varieties, no, you can't. But peas will be very distinct from the lettuces, so you should be okay. Ginger is... I'm in Ward 7. If that's Zone 7, that's similar to Maryland. Ginger needs a good... Let me just think. May, June, July, August. It needs a good 12, but at least 16 weeks to grow. Ginger, you want to, and I have tons of videos on it. Go to my channel, look up starting ginger, growing ginger. I start it indoors for about 4 to 8 weeks so that it starts sprouting. I get it into my garden in April. I cover it with plastic and get it growing. It needs a long growing period. So you really want garlic out in the garden, spring, after the frost, or if you can protect it. And it really has to grow through the whole summer, really into later September here, and I will be harvesting it fully in October. The cool thing about ginger is you can take pieces of the rhizome, when they start forming, and that's like really later July, August, September. So you can take pieces and cook with it. But ginger, if the ground freezes and if the ginger freezes, it will be killed off. It's not like garlic that can handle the frost a whole lot. So maybe you're asking, can you put it in the ground now for it to sprout next year? You would have to have ground that doesn't freeze through. And it also gets really moldy when it's cold and stuff like that. That's why I like to sprout it indoors, get it growing, get it rooted, and then get it outside when the warmth is coming and it takes care of itself. Tina, do you ever use tomato seeds that have not fermented? I have a lot of tomato seeds that don't ferment. They'll drop in my compost pile. Those plants grow. The reason you ferment them is, one, you want to get that gel coat off. The gel coat inhibits germination. If the tomato didn't do that, when a tomato is warm, think about it. It's like outside, it's like 80 degrees. It's moist. It's the perfect temperature for seeds to germinate. So they naturally inhibit the germination. When they fall to the ground, the tomato begins to rot. It naturally ferments because of the sugars. The coat gets kind of dry and killed off. And then those seeds that land in the ground will germinate. So you can take the seeds, you can just let them dry on a plate, scrape them off. They're going to be a little bit slower to germinate, but you can definitely do it, What would happen is if you put like seeds that you just let the gel coat dry around it, you'll put it in the ground, they'll get moist. Microbes will start breaking that down and will germinate. They just do a little bit better when they're fermented. Prayer Warrior, I'm keeping my strawberries and herbs outside this winter in GreenStalks. I have frost covers and insect covers. Do you think layering both may help? So you're in Mass. Strawberries are really hardy. Like, I would just look up at what temperatures the strawberries can survive. If you're growing herbs wise, if you're doing chives, oregano, thyme, they're really hardy too. The frost covers will help. The insect cover won't do much. I mean, if you put the frost cover over, and I don't know if it's plastic or not, but I know that GreenStalk does have the plastic. They have, they have fabric to help with frost protection. They also have plastic. Like, if you're able to put some sort of plastic over it, not that it seals down at the bottom because you want the heat to be able to come out, that will kind of bring heat in. And again, like I was saying before, that will help warm up the GreenStalk tower, and it will protect the plants a little bit more from the deeper freezes. I just don't know how cold your winters get. They might be fine left alone. But if the frost cover really isn't a solid plastic, it's not going to make much difference when you have 20-degree temperatures out there. So Rodney, I saw your question again. If you have questions, you got to put question in front, or I'm going to miss it most of the time. I have carrots growing in a container with granular fertilizer mixed in. When do I need to add more fertilizer? So I'm not 100% sure because I don't know how well you set up the container. You don't have to do a whole lot. I mean, if you're putting in granular fertilizer and you're growing carrots, they're going to pull stuff from a lot of places. If you've already had in the past granular fertilizer, the containers had water-soluble stuff, it's had compost in there, you have probably more NP and K than you think. If you're not sure, I would just, at this point, use a water-soluble fertilizer. Water-soluble means the plants can use it right away. And when the greenery gets maybe this big, give it a quick drink of a water-soluble fertilizer. When it doubles in size again, maybe a little bit more. The key is just keeping it moist. You could have plenty of fertilizer in there, but you don't have to water them every week with a fertilizer. When the growth is like this much, some water-soluble. And when that doubles, some more water-soluble. And anything works. I'm affiliated with AgroThrive. If you go to any of my videos, you can use the code, save some money. I really like that. I don't know what's going on with my eye. Hold on. Fish emulsion works really well. You can certainly use the chemical type fertilizers if you want. Angela, also a PERC member, using 3-liter pots for micro tom tomatoes. Screening the bottom for soil retention will water from the bottom. Still water from the bottom. All right. I'm not very good at understanding questions today. So if if they're the permanent pots and you're going to grow in there, I mean, once a tomato plant's established, you can water from the top. We're usually indoors. You fill up the tray with water. You put your seed starts in there. It pulls the water up from the bottom. That's just a great sterile way to grow seed starts because you're not pouring water on top. You're not splashing seeds out. You're not splashing potential issues all over the place. They just nicely drink from the bottom. If your microtoms are indoors, the containers are large enough, you can water from the top certainly. But it's also easier sometimes to put them in a tray too and just water from the bottom. I mean, I vote more for indoors. It's just less messier and less work. Water from the bottom. But if the tomato plants are established, they're past really tiny seedlings and they're, maybe this big or something, you can water from the top. Nina, I've planted strawberry runners from my main plant into smaller pots. You can disconnect them when you try and tug them and they don't pop up. You want the roots to go in there. Sometimes you wait for the runner stem to die off and you cut it too. But you definitely want to make sure, check if you put a bunch in at the same time, just dig around one and see how far the roots are. But you want the roots to be something like this of the baby plants. Julie, I'm setting up raised beds to be planted next spring, which aren't here and readily accessible water supply. I'm researching a system for ollas. Have you used these before? Any advice? I have not used them before. Well, I have. I've used them in containers. They tend to release the water really quickly. So if you're going to use them, you have to make sure the part that goes into the ground that distributes the water, one, is deep enough so that it's not just coming on the surface and evaporating, but also releases in a steady way. And I don't have any specific advice for that. Sorry. Sterile starting mix is okay to overwinter peppers. If you're going to overwinter peppers outdoors, really any mix is okay. If you're going to overwinter peppers, and peppers are kind of woody bushes if they don't get cold temps and frost. So you cut the pepper back, you take it out of the ground, you put the roots into a pot. You can bring them inside or put them somewhere protected. You don't water them. They need some light, and then they stay alive. They basically are hibernating, and then you put them back out. If you're bringing your pepper plants, or you're bringing any plant in from outside in a container, you're going to have diseases and insects and craziness. So what I recommend is, if you can transfer them to another pot, put something down at the bottom. It could just be paper, foil, anything that blocks the drainage holes. But if you water, there's enough space that the water comes out. You just don't want insects and stuff climbing in and out of there. So you block that. Put in the plant, put in the new soil, and then like an inch of play sand across the top seals it. So it's going to keep in any insects. They're going to die off. Eggs are going to die off. And you just have a better experience. The insects can't really penetrate or reproduce or do anything in that inch of sand, maybe a little bit more. And it just makes bringing plants indoors a lot safer. If you're growing in towers for extending the fall season, you can get clear leaf bags. You want to cut a little hole up top so when it's warm during the day, the heat escapes. But you can put clear bags over your vertical towers, and you can put, like, in the pockets, just put some tree branches or something that poke out a little bit so that the bag stays out from the leaves. By putting that bag over it, and it has to be a clear bag, you're, of course, are getting sunlight still in there. But it's creating a nice warm climate in there during the day. The plants still do well. It's not overheating to 80, 90 degrees. It's creating heat that's getting absorbed into the GreenStalk tower or the vertical tower that you're growing in. And at night, as the heat radiates out, it stays around that tower a little bit longer. That will allow you to extend the season well past maybe when your ground outside of that freezes solid. What you're doing is you're just giving it protection at night so that the freezing of that tower, of the soil vertical tower, takes longer, and therefore your plants continue to grow. Ryan, when saving pepper seeds, should I be worried about cross-pollination? Not over-worried. Peppers are self-pollinating, so most of the time, they pollinate themselves. You could get a cross, but there's not really much you can really do about it. It's not very common, but it's possible. If you're growing like hot peppers here and sweet peppers here, and they're all intermingled, the chances are greater. But in my garden, I have like sweet peppers in one place, hot peppers in one place. Sure, they could cross in some way, but most of the time people are worried about heat getting to their sweet peppers or sweetness killing off the heat of their hot peppers. But it's not common, So I think that you're okay. Angela, excuse me. Angela, can you talk about mushroom spawn for root development? Not sure if the tip I received is a myth or legit. Thanks. So any kind of Manures, compost, mushrooms have good fungus in there. They have good microbes in there. They have mycelium, which is that white thread you see everywhere. They have just beneficial things. So mushroom spawn has lots of good stuff. So it is true that using it will help with your plants developing roots. What's more of a myth is just because you don't use it doesn't mean the good stuff isn't already in your soil. Remember, nature's been growing plants for billions of years. So forest floor loaded with all the good stuff. Like when you go into a store, you'll see like bacillus this and enzyme this and fungi this, and it's all bright colors and big labeling, grow bigger. That's just marketing. You know, if you feel like it works and you feel like it's a fair price, go ahead and use it. But your ground, your healthy ground, doesn't need all that. Maybe using mushroom spawn in a container where it's not a true ecosystem works better. But I do like mushroom spawn. Like if you can find mushroom compost at a great price, and mushroom spawn grows mushrooms. What's left behind after you harvest is mushroom compost. I think that it's good stuff. You know, it certainly helps inoculate soil if you need it, but it's a good organic way to bring in all the good stuff rather than buying like little bags of stuff and sprinkling it all over your garden. All right, finding new questions. Christina, I'm in zone 6A. No. So she's asked, can I dig up peppers and overwinter them in a non-heated greenhouse? Well, I mean, the answer is if your greenhouse at night stays above 45 degrees, you can. But if your greenhouse is getting colder and freezing, then you can't. And you're overwintering by putting the peppers into a dormant state, which is, I'm not exactly sure, but it's like really not lower than 45 degrees, not warmer, you know, than 60 degrees, let's say, because you don't necessarily want them growing, then you have to pay more attention to them. But you're trying to get them to that place where they're alive, a little bit of leaves, not really dying, not really thriving. And then when the season comes, you put them back in the ground. They've got root systems that take off. The root system establishes first, and then all this amazing greenery grows, and you get bigger plants and stuff like that. But they cannot take a freeze for sure. So my seeds aren't guaranteed to grow, but if you have a problem, we replace them or give you your money back. So they're good seeds. I mean, people have been buying. I've not had really any complaints. People might say this variety of pepper didn't sprout, so we give them their money back for the peppers, or we give them whatever to replace it. So we're very relaxed. So if you have a problem, you just let us know. Janaki, what about bringing citrus trees in for the winter? So Chicago hardy figs, here in Maryland, I leave out all winter, and they do fine. And I have one in a container, and we get 20-degree days. We get days in the teens. We get consecutive days of freezing ground. Your citrus trees will have to come in, depending on where you are. And again, I would use the sand on top, try and seal out the insects. Citrus typically has to come inside if you have any kind of cold, freezing, frosting winters. Question, Clarissa. I started a wine cap mushroom bed. When do they pop? This fall or next spring? They should pop in spring and in fall. If you just the spring and April. So you should see something. It's real possible that with the rain and the temperature changes now, they're going to pop at some point, but they should come in definitely in the fall. They're a wonderful mushroom to grow. Let me throw out some more information. This is my blog, the Rusted Garden Journal. Going forward, a lot of my videos have lots of information in there, and sometimes people don't want to be taking notes. So I'm going to have lots of sister articles to my videos starting now, but really through 2024. And you can find recipes and details and everything in there if you want to check that out. And I also have a podcast, which I'm putting out about 2 a month. And it's the Rusted Garden Homestead. And I just did episode 4, so we're just getting rolling with that. All right. Let's get back to the questions. Oh, okay, we're at 11:53. I feel like I should do, like, I am a board member for a nonprofit called the Community Ecology Institute, and I volunteer, board member, and I work at Freetown Farm. I really enjoy this format. I mean, I wish there were people here. It's a little bit easier, but I like answering questions. I'm thinking about doing a fundraising marathon where I might stay on for like a whole day and answer questions for donations to Freetown Farm. We'll see how that goes, or that idea goes. All right, let me find some more questions. Clyde, you can find my podcast anywhere: Spotify, Apple, Google, etc. It's linked to my blog if you go to my blog, but I use Buzzsprout to hold my podcast. So they're like a Buzzsprout. Then Buzzsprout sends them over to Apple, Spotify, etc. And they're also at my blog. Carol, I live in Zone 9. Can I just wrap plastic around my pepper plants to save them for the winter? Again, if the plastic is going to keep the temperatures from really dropping for a prolonged period below 45, that should work. You know, you would be cutting them back. You know, they shouldn't have a lot of leaves. If you wrap stuff in plastic, sometimes airflow gets a little bit messed up. Diseases can set in or insects go crazy. But it's worth a try. But it's really about wherever the peppers are, you want them not really being in prolonged temperatures below 45 degrees. Hoosier, I don't know the answer to that. How many years can I overwinter the same pepper plant? It's going to get bigger and bigger, and in theory you would need a bigger and bigger pot, but I mean, you could probably do it forever. But at some point, you're going to be kind of cutting the root system back and shrinking it so, you know, it's not going to get massive or anything like that. But if you're successful with it, there's no reason why you can't keep doing that. Question mark. I have an olive tree small. It has light brown raised bumps all over the leaves, not on the new growth. Is it a fungus? So I don't know what that is. I don't grow olive trees, but usually when you do see bumps on leaves, it is some sort of fungus or disease. And I would just encourage you to try and use Google Lens or try and figure out what it is, because you're doing the right thing. You want to identify it, know what it is, and know what you have to do. I just don't know. Why is your garden rusty? So it's the rusted garden because just when I just have a habit of leaving tools out, they rust. Hammers, saws, pruners. I love the look of old rusted garden tools, shovels, rakes, broken rakes. So I just named it after that. Really a reflection of, you know, when I'm done something, I just usually drop I do better now. Like, you know, it's a waste of money. But the idea of just rusty tools and being around the garden, I just like the look. So I called it the Rusted Garden, which a lot of people think it's the rustic, R-U-S-T-I-C. In hindsight, if I was building a brand, you know, I would want something maybe a little bit more distinct, but life has worked out fine. Thank you, Garden, for the donations to Freetown. And we're growing. We have a fundraiser coming up. And I might do, maybe I'll do something with them that we're just doing fundraising, for a day. Maybe a nice little marathon, just like this. Angela, good idea on the time zone. And we probably would do, probably later, maybe we do 12 to 12, something crazy, because then we can get our friends over in Australia. Two gals, I'm getting my seed garlic ready. I've seen some opinions that you shouldn't plant garlic in the same space every year. I don't think that's true. What do you think? So, it's possible for like garlic or onions to get like wireworms or pests. If you don't have any pest issue, there's no reason to not put it in the same place. I tend to do that. If you have room, it's great to rotate it. If you don't put it in the same place, I've just not had issue with it. It's like if your garden has a disease or an insect that is problematic, it might not be the same issue with my garden, and the problems that I have might not be the same issue with your garden. So if I would give it a try, maybe if you're concerned, plant some in another place totally. This way, if something happens to it, you have a backup growth, but that's a great way to experiment. Just put it in the same place and put some in another place. Secondhand tools are the best. I do have 2 hardy hibiscus. They kind of stand out weird because they're really big flowers and they look tropical, but I have actually 3. I actually have 5. I have a smaller white hibiscus over by my greenhouse or by my garage. So yes, definitely. And you can make nice teas out of them. Want to grow peppers inside this winter? Are they too... Oh, lost the question. Hold on. All right, we're at 12 o'clock. I'll stay on a little bit longer today. Gonna try and... So the thread bounces really fast. Hardy hibiscus. All right, here we go. Want to grow peppers inside this winter, and they're too tall for a grow station. Suggestions on standing grow lights. I don't. They probably... So when you're growing for full fruit, like I recommend white LED lights from like Walmart. They're like $20, 5,000 lumens, 6,100 Kelvin. You can find all that on my YouTube channel. They work wonderfully for transplants. I also grew spinach under them. I grew radishes under them, and I grew tiny Tim tomatoes. They did fine. If you're getting into something like peppers or things that need more light, sometimes you need better grow lights that have the red, the yellow bulb, LED lights and all that. So you might need that, I'm not sure. But you might want to take a section out of maybe your grow station. You're going to need a shelf, and you put them under the shelf. You have lots of space, and you will just be raising the lights as the plant goes up. The plants down at the bottom, or the leaves at the bottom, aren't going to get as much light, but that's why you kind of need specialized light that just goes down and penetrates further, has the right lumens, the right par value. I mean, I would experiment, maybe try like banana pepper, something that's really prolific, and see what happens. Julie, maybe we'll start ending the questions here. What are your thoughts on pea and oak cover crops in a new raised bed I'm setting up for next season? Any cover crop that isn't going to seed and be problematic is great. I don't do a lot of cover crops because I keep growing in my beds, and then it gets too cold and there's nothing to grow, and I have a lot of compost. But if you have open beds, cover crops are great. They will penetrate into the soil. They will loosen soil. The roots will hold N, P, and K. That's normal. When they die, they'll be eaten by microbes, give back. The greenery will have nitrogen in there, and it's a nice way to kind of build, your soil. Especially when you use peas or anything that can pull nitrogen from the atmosphere, you're bringing in extra nitrogen to your space. Lily, Is it a good idea to put some native soil in raised beds with peat moss, vermiculite, compost? I didn't, and my soil seems weak. So native soil varies. It's good to make sure that your soil is loose and drains. You don't need vermiculite, but adding peat moss helps. But if you have more compost, really mixing compost in almost at a 50-50 ratio makes that soil wonderful. Compost always makes things better. Peat moss is great for using if you have heavy clay soil. I'd skip the vermiculite. You don't need that. But a combination of native soil, like a third native soil, a third peat, a third compost, makes a great mix. And you're only worried really about the top 6 or 8 inches, so you don't have to go deeper than that. All right, so I think we'll wrap up. You can throw in one more question at the bottom if something pops up. Again, this is my public live. Do it every second and fourth Thursday at 11 a.m. It's called Garden Grounds. Light discussion on a theme, mostly about answering your questions. And if you like this format, I do have the perk memberships where I do this at least 4 times a month. Have 2 classrooms, live classrooms for teaching, and we do the Grow as We Grow series. Vermiculite is just basically neutral. It doesn't have anything. It loosens soil, Bonnie. So in a seed starting mix, it's great because it's sterile. Using it in a container is okay. You can, peat moss works fine, but you can do piece of vermiculite. Really out in your earth beds, it doesn't do a whole lot. It's just an extra expense. Compost is the best. Peat moss helps. You just don't need vermiculite in the earth beds. All right, everybody have a great weekend. I will see you all on the second, I don't know why I keep saying Tuesday, on the second Thursday of next month. Take care.